Is Myanmar's military losing control? A series of daring attacks by rebel groups are seen as a turning point. The country's been in turmoil since a coup 3 years ago. So is Myanmar on a path to all-out civil war? And what would that mean for the region? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Myanmar's military government has suffered significant defeats at the hands of anti-coup opposition groups in recent weeks. In the past week, Karen fighters have seized a vital town on the border with Thailand, and other resistance militia have attacked the capital using drones laden with explosives. So what's next for the military junta as it deals with these security challenges? And do the recent gains rebel groups have made represent a turning point for Myanmar? We'll discuss all these questions with our panel of guests in a moment. But first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Myanmar's military seized power in 2021, carrying out a coup against the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi. Ever since, the junta has faced armed opposition to its rule. But in the past 6 months, the fighting has intensified and become more widespread. Most recently, a strategically important town on the border with Thailand has fallen under rebel control. Hundreds of government troops guarding Myawaddy have reportedly surrendered. It's the latest in a string of losses for Myanmar's military, giving hope to the government in exile that the junta can be defeated.
This is a major blow to the Myanmar military junta. This is the largest, most important of the 6 official Thai-Burma border crossings. Give you an idea, the perspective between April 2023 and March 2024, over $1 billion in bilateral trade was conducted through this checkpoint.
Karen fighters and other anti-military groups united in October to seize territories in Kachin State in the north, Chin in the west and Mon in the south. The highlighted regions were once under full military control, but have shrunk since the coup 3 years ago. As the fighting increases, so do the number of those seeking safety. The UN says nearly 3 million people have been displaced and around 13 million don't have enough food. That's almost a quarter of the population.
As the conflict continues to escalate, as the humanitarian needs intensify, and with the monsoon season just around the corner, time is of the essence for the people of Myanmar. They cannot afford for us to forget. They cannot afford to wait.
Many are concerned that after its recent losses, Myanmar's military will fight back with a ferocity that will not spare civilian lives. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this much more now with our guests today. We have Khin Ohmar, the founder of Progressive Voice, a policy research organisation that advocates for a democratic Myanmar, and an award-winning human rights activist in Bangkok. Kim Jolliffe, an independent consultant who works towards peace, security and human rights in Myanmar and the wider region. And in New York City is Nicholas Bequelin, a visiting fellow at the Yale Law School's Paul Tsai China Center and a veteran specialist on human rights in Asia. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. So we are now more than 3 years after the military coup. And if I'd a year ago, Omar, said what was going on in the country, I think most people would have said it was a depressing stalemate with the military junta controlling the majority of the country and armed groups battling just in certain areas. But in recent months, things seem to have really changed. Explain to me what's been going on.
Well, the Myanmar military junta now has a very little control over the country, effective control, while the National Unity Government and their alliance, the Ethnic Revolutionary Forces, they are all together winning more and more territorial control and administration, setting up the services for the people. So it's a very different landscape in Myanmar, where pretty much the whole world in the last 3 years thought this country is back under the iron fist of the military again, but that's not the case. And in fact, actually, the Democratic Revolutionary Forces or the Democratic Resistance Movement is in fact winning, and the military is at the very verge of about to be collapsing. And again, that's something that the world never thought this military will actually fall apart, but the military is so weak and they are actually at the verge of falling apart and collapsing. So it is the make and break point also, where the People's Democratic Resistance Movement is advancing with their political goal to establish a new federal democratic Myanmar.
OK, Kim, if we look at the events of recent months, and I've been looking through exactly what's been taking place, but you've been following it much closer than me, it seems that the date, the 27th of October, seems to be potentially a turning point, because that's when an operation began, Operation 1027, named because of the date. Tell us about that operation and what it achieved.
Yeah, so Operation 1027 was led by 3 ethnic revolutionary armies that until then had kind of maintained ceasefires or weren't fighting as extensively for a while. And then they initiated this operation where they took over huge parts of northern Shan State, which borders China. And this happened with some degree of blessing from China. This was planned over months. They had to accumulate a lot of ammunition to undertake it. And the main reason was that they also took part in cracking down on these pig butchering kind of cyber scam gangs that are run by Chinese triads that Beijing opposes. So that created space for them to do this operation. But they've also repeatedly stated that their goal is to take down the military junta. And they've also been coordinating a lot with other resistance groups that have been fighting since the coup. And some of these ethnic armies have been fundamentally opposed to Myanmar military rule for many, many decades. So a lot of different actors have found a common purpose and are coordinating much more extensively to take over huge parts of the country.
OK, Nicholas, just focus on that bit about the cyber scams and pig butchering, because China, I think, had been very, very unhappy about what had been going on its border. Tell me about that aspect and whether you think China actually helped these rebel groups, either tacitly or actively.
Yeah, Myanmar is a major headache for Beijing, and China didn't welcome the coup. They sort of stay on the fence for a few months, but after a year, they decided that the military junta was actually the government in charge and they had to engage with it. The problem is that the junta's control over Myanmar's territory is very imperfect, right? There are 3 pillars of the power of the Tatmadaw. One is how much territory you control. This has gone down significantly, including in the north. How much money you have in the coffer. This is going down significantly because they can't sell as much gas and they don't have as much investment from China as they use, and then how popular you are in the country or how fearful people are of your rule, and this is also going down. So China has seen instability in Myanmar as a major concern. Another concern, as you mentioned, is the fact that criminal gangs have settled across the border from China to run these cyber scams where they traffic people, they trick people into working in these cyber centers where they trick people, run gambling operations. And this has a huge cost for Chinese citizens and people who are being scammed and lose a lot of money, not to mention people who are sort of forced in sort of modern slavery to work there. So Beijing decided that something had to be done. And as Kim said, created the space for the armed ethnic groups to sort of take over, arrest a number of these gangs and send them back to China. Now, the political side of this is that who is the person who actually gave control to this region and gave a safe haven to these cyber criminal gangs? It's Min Aung Hlaing himself. When he was a military
He is the
commander.
leader. He's the leader of the junta, just to be clear to our viewers.
And today is the leader of the junta. So I think, politically, this is very uncomfortable for the junta because it shows that Beijing will not protect Min Aung Hlaing at all costs.
So staying, Omar, just for now, we'll broaden it out in a second, but to the Chinese border. China then forced a ceasefire, as I understand it, between the junta and these groups, meaning these groups have locked in their control of this border area. How damaging is this for the junta, given not just militarily what they've lost, but also economically for them? Because this is a vital trade route, as I understand it.
Oh, it is a great loss for sure. And also, let us remember that this military junta actually is also facing enormous targeted economic sanctions from different parts of the world, where they are actually losing a lot of, including the investment and where their major money flows to them are being cut. So it's a combination of you losing the trade route as well as these targeted economic pressure. So it is definitely a great loss for them, and it is where they become much more weaker when it comes to also taking control of how they want to take control. It's become more and more far more impossible for them, also because they are losing the trade route as well as the targeted economic sanctions from like EU and US and Canada and as well.
OK, Nicholas, if you can take the story on for us. It widens out, doesn't it? The rebel groups in other parts of the country are now getting gains. We've got in Rakhine State, we've got recently on the Thai-Myanmar border. Tell us what's happened recently.
Well, simply that the rebel armed force there have taken control of what is the second largest land ports for trades with Thailand. This has not been completely formalized, but the military there has already agreed that it would surrender and that they know negotiating the terms. As last as I checked in New York, we have a 12-hour time difference. And this is huge because this is an enormous amount of revenue and trade that flows through this border. It will also allow the armed groups to sort of increase their operations, their support, their ability to provide medical treatments to the soldiers who were wounded, and so on and so forth. But it's symbolically, it's also a huge blow to the military. Now, we shouldn't overstate this either, because I think this is a particularly onerous war on civilians, right? We have 30,000 people killed probably since the coup in 2021. We have 8 to 10 to 15, it's very hard to know, civilians' death. The military basically tactic is to terrorize the civilians, to bomb them from airplanes, to torture and kill them in detention. So this is a very, very vicious war. But the terror doesn't seem to be working. And I think that is something that ultimately could be a fault line within the Tatmadaw itself, which is, the only way that the country can move forward is if there is a division within the army. Unfortunately, some of the regional actors do not want this. So we mentioned China, but Russia is also there and providing a lot of military weapon and support from Myanmar. Thailand would not like to see too much chaos on its border. India either. And none of these countries want to have the West coming back in the country. So the problem with this conflict, as many conflicts around the world, is not so much the domestic situation, which is pretty atrocious, but it's the fact you have so many external actors that do not have stake in the welfare and of the population. I think that's where the international community and the UN have to step up. It's been a neglected conflict for the last few years.
Kim, how would you describe what is currently going on? Is this a civil war or is it a revolution against the military?
I think a revolution is perfectly apt term for this, because the main things that's happening is that this has been driven from the bottom up. This all began with mass strikes of the civil service, huge numbers of elected politicians, and then they formed alliances with civil society groups, women's organizations, all kinds of different stakeholders that had been fundamentally opposed to military rule and absolutely could not bear the thought of going back. They fled to ethnic resistance organizations, and although those EROs, as they're called, are often characterized as just interested in their autonomy, actually most of them have pretty ambitious revolutionary platforms focused on federal democracy, achieving rights of the people, and so on, because they've also suffered for so many decades under military rule. So I think that really has created an awakening, which has been attempted in previous generations, but now it's happened on social media, and there's been a real change of heart from many different people, that this is now the time to really rise up. And for a lot of the leaders, particularly the elected politicians, they never really chose to go into an armed revolution, as it were. It really happened from the bottom up, as so many people saw their lives being lost. Crackdowns began on protesters, and just these extremely sadistic, particularly evil kind of methods that were seen from the military have created a really strong response. And I'd say for at least a year, all of the main stakeholders have firmly believed that they can win this time. And I think that's been a really big change. And that's what's brought all kinds of different actors into a common purpose, even though some of them have different ideologies, different backgrounds, and in many cases, different kind of national identities, different languages and everything. But there's a real belief that this time, if they work together, the military can finally be removed. So it's absolutely a revolutionary movement. And I think if it's successful, or even if it's not successful in all of its aims, there's absolutely no way the country can go back to how it was before. So I think we're seeing serious transformational politics underway, which is in some ways more significant even than what we see on the battlefield.
Omar, let me bring you in on that point. So many different groups, and you heard Kim then say they all have slightly different aims. Is this potentially a problem? They all agree what they are against, the military junta, but do they all agree what they are for? And down the line, could this be problematic?
Well, this is the first time our people from different background, different ethnic, different religion, these communities ever had a chance to come together. So it is actually the process of coming together. So when they come together, this is the time that they are also already laying out the roadmap, political roadmap, what kind of federal democracy that we want to establish. So I think this is not something to be worried, because yes, you're right. They all have a very common goal of removing this military and bring to hold this military to account and all of that. But at the same time, there is a very common political vision that is already laid out in what we call as federal democracy charter. And that is the baseline where these different ethnic communities, different minorities, majorities, all together, who've been oppressed by this military for 7 decades, now have a chance to come together. So a lot to discuss, but this is the greatest chance that our people ever had, where the people are actually already building this new Myanmar, new federal democratic Myanmar in the time of this active war, the terror campaign that military is actually launching against them. So I'm not worried, even though there is a time that people need to actually come together in this nation building process, but the chance that they are getting, this is the most important thing, that they are actually working hands in hands in the much stronger coordination than that you will see in the last 2 years, for example.
Nicholas, battles all around the edges, all around the borders, which is very worrying for anyone who's trying to control a country as the junta are. One assumes these rebel forces will now try to move to the centre, move to the urban areas. Tell us why the military aren't doing better here, because they have more firepower, don't they? They have more arms, they have superior artillery, they have air dominance. Why are they currently losing?
Well, I think one of the key issues is troops' morale. I think that the morale in the army is, very, very shaky. They have lost. The people are clearly on the side. I mean, there are no constituency that is for the military junta anymore. That really is the major difference with this coup, is that no one is in favor. The other thing is that in the previous era, when the recent era in which the junta was in power, they benefited from the gas boom. There were new gas fields that were found in the Indian Ocean, particularly in the Shui gas field in Chao Pyo in the Indian Ocean, and they built a pipeline that put this gas from Chao Pyo in the Indian Ocean to China. And that created an enormous amount of revenue. Foreign companies, Total and others invested. Thailand bought a lot of gas for the northern part of the country. And that sort of supported the junta's rule, and they were able to distribute, economic benefits to their cronies and within the army. But it is not the case anymore. The Shui gas field is running out. All the major companies have gone out. There are sanctions which are, not all, they're not what they should be, because the generals are still able to put a lot of money abroad, in Singapore, in Dubai, in Thailand, and so on. But it is sort of hurting their operation. And therefore, they don't have enough money to keep people on their side. And the biggest evidence we have of this is that they have now resorted to conscription, which is hugely unpopular. So they're going to round up people, force them to fight poorly. They've never shown any care for the foot soldiers. And this is why they sort of resort to this very violent tactics against civilians, and also the use of a few crack troops, right? You have a few crack troops who are actually very well trained. They're really killing machines. They don't, of course, obey any of the international humanitarian law provisions. But even this at its limits. And one group that has proved to be very able on the military front is this newish group, and Khin Ohmar can talk about it, is the Arakan army in Rakhine states. And they've been able to link up with the ethnic groups and build their military power, and they're inflicting defeat after defeat in Rakhine states to the military junta, which ultimately may also be a problem for a big component of the population here that we haven't mentioned yet, the Rohingya. And so there, the fracture lines among ethnic groups and that you mentioned, John, are, they are a concern, definitely something that should be addressed. But at the moment, the junta really has nothing to offer in terms of a way out. And that's why the international community has to step up. And I think after Guterres and the UN Secretary General and the international community were sort of hoping that ASEAN, the regional group, would try to help. And now I think we've run to a point where none of this has worked, and there need to be an agreement and a vision for the future at a higher level that involves, China, Russia, the UN Security Council, India, Thailand. Only if these actors sort of have a basic agreement, we'll be able to move forward. And I think that's why Guterres just named Julie Bishop, the former foreign minister from Australia, as its new special representative to try to sort of notch up the diplomatic activity over what to do with.
Let me bring in Omar on that. What would you like to see the international community do right now? What would you like to see Julie Bishop in her new role as an international envoy do?
I would really like to see the UN Security Council adopt a new resolution, a binding resolution under the UN Charter Chapter 7 to take action against this military. Because that's the way to really end this military tyranny and also end the people suffering on the ground, where Myanmar people will have a chance to start building this federal democracy sooner than later, while also the international community will be actually saving the people's lives on the ground. So that is exactly what we've been advocating for. But it's been very challenging because, as you can imagine, China and Russia in the UN Security Council, being the permanent member, having the veto power, always continue to be supporting this military junta, but also protecting the military junta from being held accountable by international law. So that's why we are approaching the international community, governments, individuals. We're looking for the champions of the democracy who actually want to protect the Myanmar people to step up and really come together to put more pressure on this military junta. Particularly, we're calling for the aviation fuel cut. Basically, we want the world to ban all the aviation fuel and aviation fuel chain so that this military has no more so that this military junta cannot bomb the people anymore, because that's the only thing that they have now, the only leverage the military junta has over the people's revolution. So that's what we want.
Let me bring in Kim quickly on those points, because are you really going to get the international community, and in many ways it's the UN Security Council that can act, when you've got China and Russia there? I noticed at the Security Council meeting held about a week ago, the Russian ambassador described the junta as our long-standing friend and close partner.
Yes, I think Russia in particular is a major bloc at the moment. I think that, though I agree with Omar, that you have to push from all angles for that to happen. I think that the whole UN system is realising that their kind of negligence, putting ASEAN at the front of the situation, despite ASEAN not being able to solve the issue, has not worked. And there really is a need for urgency among UN member states to push something through. And yeah, there's already a lot of pressure on aviation fuel, some of the steps that have been taken, but it's nowhere near enough. So it really is a case of just closing down some of those remaining loopholes and taking the extra steps. Because as Omar says, the junta has been a rump state for over a year now. It can't reach many locations from the ground. It has huge problems moving infantry troops around, most of whom are veterans and retired people. A lot of them are poorly trained anyway, or now forced conscripts, as Nicola said. So we really are at a point where you've just got a military that's becoming increasingly isolated and bombing wildly, setting fire to markets, obliterating hospitals wherever they lose control. And much of the world is just kind of shrugging and hoping the whole thing goes away. But some much more decisive action is needed, because the writing has been on the wall for a long time now. There's no way, really no way, the junta can reverse this. But the problem is that it's got this huge buildup of troops over many decades. So it's extremely difficult to defeat wholesale. So you have this long, extremely violent conflict.
Thank you very much to all our guests today, Khin Ohmar, Kim Jolliffe and Nicolas Bequelin. You can find plenty of background on the situation in Myanmar with reports, video and analysis on our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like your views too. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or if you prefer to message us on X, just look for @AJ Inside Story from the team here in Doha. Please stay safe. I'll be back here very soon. Bye-bye for now.